Hey guys, welcome back. So today I'm working on this 3600 watt Ridgid generator. This one I found on Craigslist. The person selling it was actually selling 3 pieces of equipment for $100 each, this being one of them. He didn't offer too much information about it other than he was moving. He didn't want to take it with him and it doesn't run, but it should run with a bit of attention. So that is my hope. You know, this machine actually looks fairly clean and it seems to be complete. You know, that said, we do have issues here. The fuel valve was left on and the tank is a total mess inside. I pulled the cover off and there is a ton of rust, and there's a good 2 or 3 gallons of fuel in that tank and a bunch of rust. So that is going to be a challenge to clean up. This tank is also discontinued and not available, so cleaning it up is really the only choice here. You know, that said, that's a big investment of time, and I don't want to clean that tank up until I know we have a good engine and a good generator. So that is where I'm going to start. So let me get you set up a little bit better and get going on this. I'm going to start by draining the fuel from the carb. I want to see how bad the fuel is and if the fuel can even still make it from the tank to the carburetor. So just getting this breather tube out of the way to get a little bit better access. The fuel valve is still on. So let's see what we get out of here. Yeah, that's not a good sign. Let me double check the fuel valve. Fuel valve is definitely turned on right now, and we're getting nothing. So yeah, it could just be a blockage on the tank. Maybe the carb is not bad. I'm not sure. I think the only way we're going to know is to take it off and open it up. But before I do that, I think I'm going to get the air box out of there, disconnect the fuel line to the carburetor. We'll hook up a temporary line, try feeding it a bit of fuel, and see if it takes any into that carburetor. Okay, at least we got an air filter. So that's a good sign. That carb is a complete mess. I can tell you already, it might be a total loss. There's a lot of corrosion up on the top of the carb, and usually it's limited to the bottom portion where the fuel is. So if it's that bad up here, then I would say the bottom is a million times worse. So forget what I just said about feeding it fuel. I don't think it's going to take any. I'm just going to put these bolts back on. We'll try a little bit of starting fluid and see if we can get it to run long enough to validate the engine health and the health of that generator. Surprisingly, that throttle plate still moves. And the choke still moves too. Yeah, there's hope. Check the oil real quick, make sure it has some. Yeah, it's well used. It is full though, so it should be fine to test with. Well, the good news is the engine, it sounds good, and the generator is making power. But we have another issue here. When the engine started, a bunch of debris came flying out from what I assume is a critter nest behind here. I'm actually not sure because it's not really nesting material. It looks like potting soil. So Yeah, I think we need to get the carb off. We'll get it opened up, do a quick assessment, see if it can be cleaned. And we also need to get that blower housing off to see what is going on inside of there. I'm not even going to try to save this fuel line. It's pretty petrified. The condition's not good. So I did shut the fuel valve off. So we're just going to snip it right there. We turn that fuel valve back on. Yeah, the tank is plugged. It's actually not too bad in here. There is no critter nest. There's a bit of dirt. Not really sure how that got in there, but we'll clean that up. I couldn't get the blower housing off because the low oil module is kind of tethering it to the machine. So I want to remove that next so we can get this fully off the machine. And I guess the good news is the fuel did start flowing. So I'm going to take a little sample and just get a better look at how bad that fuel is. All right, let's see how bad this is. Yeah. That is pretty bad. So I'm kind of torn as far as what to do right now about this tank. I don't want to drain it completely until I'm ready to de-rust it, but I might take a little bit off the bottom. That's where the water would be, and I'm sure there is water in there, and that's why the tank looks the way that it does. So let me take a couple quarts out of it, and we'll leave the rest for later. The fuel's coming out pretty slow, so I'm going to try to speed things up a bit just by putting a little bit of air through the system. And I'm pretty sure this is all water, actually, that's coming out. It does not smell like good fuel or bad fuel. So I definitely want to get it out at least enough so that we get all the water out of the system for now. I think I made it worse. Yeah, change of plan. Let me take this filter out. I'm hoping that that is the clog. Oh yeah, there we go. It was just the filter. I just shut the fuel valve off because we're finally starting to see a little bit of fuel in this bottle. This is a 2-liter bottle, and I'd say we have a good liter of water in here. So yeah, that is not a good thing. But at least now the tank is stable. That buys us a little bit of time to get the engine and the generator squared away, and then we'll circle back on this later. So what do you think? Can this one be saved? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say no. I think this one's going to be pretty bad. Let's take a look. Bowl nut actually doesn't look terrible, so maybe there's hope. Wow. That is pretty bad. Look at that. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to save this one. This one's pretty bad. Let me just dump that out. Take a quick look at the bottom of the bowl. It's like mud. The bowl actually isn't terrible. I mean, there is some rust and some other junk, but that actually would clean up. And actually, that's cleaning right off with little effort. Needle. Yeah, I think the needle is trash. Let's see if we can get that pin out. Yeah, that pin is not moving at all. So I'm afraid I'm going to break those ears off. It actually did move. Okay, let's keep going. Needle is stuck. Might be able to get the float off and leave the needle behind. Yeah, I don't know if that needle is ever going to come out of there. And if it does, it's not going to work. Looks like this fuel clamp is so badly rusted that it just split in half. We send a little bit of PB Blaster down there. That works pretty well for freeing needles. Not so sure on something like this. Yeah. You know, I'm going to soak this in the ultrasonic just like this. Get as much of the grime off as possible and assess this further. That needle, it's going to be a problem. I'm sure it's damaged and we're going to need a new one. Now these needles, I haven't looked up the exact price for this. This is a Mikuni carb. Mikuni needles are usually, I would say 10 or 15 bucks. But I think we have bigger issues here. Potentially. You know, I actually would not say this one is hopeless. So yeah, let's do an initial round of cleaning in the ultrasonic and see where we go from there. I think we'll give it a little extra. Let's see how it's coming along. It's only been 5 minutes. It's going to need a lot more than that. Yeah, a lot of corrosion, a little bit of rust. It is cleaning up. Bowl looks a lot better. So yeah, I would say it's going to need another 15, 20 minutes, and we'll see what we have after that. I think the needle might be coming out. There's hope. Actually cleaned up halfway decent. I would say this will run the engine. The question is how well. Anyway, once I got this out of the ultrasonic, I did spend a second. I just brushed all the corrosion off that I could using the brush and this little wire wheel. I also got the pilot jet out, polished that up as well, and I already ran through everything. And I've done the same to the carburetor. The main jet, it's stuck. It's not coming out, but I am able to run through it. So it is not clogged. And the emulsion tube on this one actually is not removable, which is a concern. I'm sure there is some junk in there. And I'd say the other thing that's concerning is the pilot circuit, because there is a little fuel pickup on the side, and then the fuel travels up a passage right here to the top of the carb. And given all the junk that was in there, this passage could be clogged. So even though the pilot jet is clear, it could still be an issue. So let's get this pilot back in here. We'll get the needle and the float back in. And get this back on the machine. I am going to leave the airbox off for testing, which might make it run a little bit lean. So if it is surging a bit, I will add the airbox. So what do you think? Is it going to run? I think it will. Hopefully it runs well, because a new OEM carburetor is currently going for $225. So that's not really an option. There are clones for this for about $25, which might work. I have tried clones on Subaru engines before, and the clone for the EX27 and the EX30 runs the engine way too rich. Now this is actually an EX21, and that is a completely different clone carb, so that might actually run the engine well. So it looks like the needle and seat are working. Yeah, let's give it a try. All things considered, the carb's doing a halfway decent job given where we started. The engine started first pull. I was not able to turn the choke off right away. I did need to leave it on for a while, and then finally I was able to fully turn the choke off, and the engine did stay running. The engine speed was a little bit unstable, so I would say the carb isn't completely running right. Potentially adding the airbox might make the difference. But given how bad that carb was, I'm more inclined to try the clone carb. I would say that has a chance of running better than an OEM that was in the condition that that one was. So let me pause it. I am going to order the clone carb. We'll get that one installed, and we'll try this again. Carburetor showed up today, and it's part of a kit. Comes with the gaskets, of course the carburetor, and this actually fits the EX13, 17, and the 21 like this. And I have used this one on an EX17 before, and it ran the engine quite well. So let's get this one installed and give it a try. Let's try this again. I'm really hoping that this clone comes through. Can't argue with that result. For $26.99, this clone carb is doing well. It was harder to start than the OEM cold, but restarting it, first pull, no issues, can turn the choke off right away, and the engine's running a lot better with this carburetor. So I think this has earned an oil change. So let's get the oil changed real quick, and then we'll move on to deal with the mess that's inside of here. According to the manual, this should take 600 milliliters of oil, 10W30. Perfect. Besides being well-used oil, it's not too bad. I mean, there's no shiny bits, so I think the engine is healthy. It makes me wonder, though, if this has ever had an oil change, because this machine really isn't that old. It's about 12 years old, and given the condition of the fuel, it could not have been used much after it was purchased. You can actually see the bottom of the tank now that that nasty water is out, and there is actually a clean spot. So yeah, I think it will clean up. Also, you can see the sides of the tank on the bottom of your screen and maybe a bit to the left, and those are rust free. So I think the majority of the rust is purely on the bottom. Obviously there's some on the top. Most likely that was just some of the water condensing on the top of the tank causing the rust issue there. So I'm going to drain the fuel from the tank. I'm going to filter it and clean it up. Most likely I'm going to reuse it because where I live, I can recycle fuel twice a year, only 5 gallons at a time. So I save the worst of the worst for those days. And this tank easily has 3 or 4 gallons in it. So if it can be diluted and used, then that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to clean it up, dilute it, put it in my car and burn it right away, assuming it's still flammable. So once we get it out, I'll do a quick test, make sure it still burns. All right, let's give this a quick try. I've got two samples of fuel here. The one on the right is the old fuel we just pulled out of the tank, and the one on the left is some fresh fuel. So we'll set them both on fire, see that the old stuff burns, and just kind of compare how they burn differently. Pretty similar, I would say. Yeah, so the old fuel did extinguish a little bit sooner. Not too bad, though. Definitely usable. I use these clear bottles mostly to see when there's water. You know, this one does have a bit on the bottom, and it does go to the bottom if you let it separate out. So I'll pour most of this off until I get close to the water line, and then I'll recycle the junk at the bottom. Now, for the first pass, I just put it through a paper towel. It only filters out the big chunks, not the finer stuff. So after everything's gone through once on the paper towel, I'll then filter it again through a coffee filter to get all the finer sediment out of the fuel. And then, of course, this will be mixed with a full tank of gas in the car. And then it'll be gone. And this one also has just a bit of water. So I'll stop just short so that water doesn't end up in the tank. Same thing with this one, so we'll stop short, keep the water in the bottle. Anyway, I think you get the idea. The tank and the generator, it's not empty, so I'm going to keep going. We'll get it all out. We'll pass this stuff through one more filter with the coffee filter, and then I can move on. The tank just finished draining, so let's use the borescope and get a better look at what we're dealing with here. So I'm just going to hit record, and I'll put that on the screen so you can see it a little bit better. And we're starting with the camera that's facing down. So right now we're looking straight down from the fuel fill. And yeah, you can see a bunch of rust. It actually doesn't look as bad as I thought. And right now I'm looking the full length. The sidewalls look pretty good all the way around. And I couldn't see that much metal on the tank before draining it. So I have a feeling a lot of that may not be rust. I mean, it is rust, but I don't think it's coming necessarily from the bottom. I think a lot of that should clean up with just some nuts and bolts and shaking it around. I think a lot of this might be coming from the top of the tank. So let me switch cameras here to the side view. And that is the side camera just looking at the fill. Going a little bit deeper. And yeah, the top of the tank is a complete mess. So I'm thinking a lot of the rust we're seeing in the bottom is actually flaking down from the top. Could be wrong. I guess we'll find out once we start cleaning it. So the plan here is just put some nuts and bolts in there with some water. We'll shake it around, get the bottom cleaned up. We'll flip it over, do the same on the top. And once all the big chunks are out, I'm going to fill this with Evaporust, at least a couple gallons. We'll clean the bottom, flip it over, do the top. And with any luck, a lot of this rust should clean away. I'm actually going to start by mopping the bottom of the tank. I think a lot of that stuff is loose. It might just lift out of there. Made a little bit of a dent. The tank's dry now, so it's not really as effective trying to mop that up. So let's get the tank off and we'll proceed to just putting the nuts and bolts in there with some water. So to get the tank off, it's just 4 bolts, 1 on each corner. This control panel though is in the way, so we have to remove the bolts on either side holding the panel in place. We can just move that forward a bit to gain access to those tank bolts. Got the fuel valve shut off, and I'm not going to put a ton of water in here. Maybe just 1 of these. This is hot water. Might help a little bit to break things up. And we'll just fill it with nuts and bolts. Pretty good for about 2 minutes worth of work. Anyway, nuts and bolts are still in there, so I'm going to refill with water. We'll repeat the process a few times until the rest of those chunks are out, and we'll move on to the Evaporust. And there's a look at the end result. That is about 30 minutes of shaking. And I kept going because every time I put fresh water in there and shook it for 2 or 3 minutes, it would become so cloudy I could not see the bottom of the tank. So after about 30 minutes of shaking and swapping that water out, I finally got to a point where I could see the bottom of the tank after shaking it. As far as the cap goes, I mean, it's still rusty, but all the chunks are off. And that was really the goal here, because although the Evaporust will eat the rust away, even if I hadn't have done what I did, it would take it a lot longer. And the Evaporust can only melt away so much rust before it becomes saturated and ineffective. And at $20 to $30 a gallon, you want to get out as much of the rust as possible ahead of time to help save on that Evaporust. So let's get the borescope in there. We'll take a quick peek at the top and see what that looks like. All right, let's get a look here. I'm not expecting the rust to be gone, but I'm hoping that the chunks are mostly gone. And yeah, that is a big difference. Still a lot of surface rust, but all the chunks are gone. So that should clean up quite a bit faster. I also left the nuts and bolts in there because once the Evaporust has done its work, I'm going to want to shake it around again and get any last bits off that the Evaporust did not melt. So let's get the Evaporust in there. I've got a gallon of brand new Evaporust and a couple gallons of used. So I'm going to use the new Evaporust to soak this cap. We'll set that aside, and you see how the new stuff is nice and clear. When it becomes used, it starts darkening up, and the darker it gets, the less effective it is, and it also can stain the tank as well. So when it starts to get really dark, you want to swap it out for some new stuff. So in this case, I'm just going to use 2 gallons. This is a 4-gallon tank. We use 1 gallon of new, 1 gallon of used, and I'm going to let this sit, I would say at least for a day, just like this, probably 2 days. And then I'll flip it over and do the same for the top of the tank. We're just past the 7-hour mark, and you can see it's making quick work of this. The rust on the cap is gone. Now we're just left with some black stains where the rust used to be, and the same can be said for the inside of the tank. I would say a majority of that rust is gone at this point. Now there is still quite a bit of pitting. Nothing's going to fix that. But all things considered, I'd say we're making out pretty well. So I'm going to give this maybe just a couple more hours, and then we'll flip it over and get that top cleaned up. We're at the 20-hour mark, and no real discernible difference. So I would say the bottom of the tank is as good as it's going to get. So I'm going to get the cap on. We'll flip this upside down and let that soak for a bit and clean up the top of that tank. It looks like we do have a small drip coming from the fuel cap, and that's to be expected. That is a vented fuel cap, and if it's functioning properly, it should leak when the tank is upside down. In this case, that cap was not functioning properly. When I cleaned the tank out with the hot water and shook it around, it built pressure quite a bit, and nothing was venting out of that fuel cap. So I would say soaking that cap in the Evaporust overnight cleared some of those vent passages, and having it drip like it is now is actually just going to help flush that system out a little bit more, hopefully without losing every bit of Evaporust in that tank. So I do have the fuel valve shut off, so this tank should pull a vacuum at some point and that leak should slow down, if not stop altogether. And just in case, I added this tray so we can catch that Evaporust if it decides to all empty out. It's just past 20 hours, and we had a little bit of leakage, but overall, not too bad. So let's flip this over. We'll get the borescope in there and take a look. Well, that's a look at the bottom of the tank, and notice you can't see the bottom anymore. The EVAPO-RUST has turned black, and that's an indication that it's been working pretty hard and evaporated a lot of rust, and now the EVAPO-RUST is saturated and largely ineffective at this point. And when it turns black, it can also start staining the metal. So I would say that EVAPO-RUST is spent and shouldn't be used anymore. Anyway, let's take a look inside and see how the top of the tank turned out. So what do you think? Is it all gone? I would be surprised if it was. There was a lot of rust. Not too bad, actually. There is still some rust in the center, but not much. It cleaned up quite a bit. So, yeah, I would say we are getting very close with this one. It does need a little bit more time. So I'm going to probably drain it out, put some new EVAPO-RUST in there. We'll give it another day or so, and then we'll check back. It's 24 hours later, and I got the 2 gallons of spent EVAPO-RUST out and put 1 gallon in of slightly used EVAPO-RUST, and it turned pretty black. It actually started turning the metal black, and the fact that it turned so dark tells me that it's still evaporating that rust. So I'm draining that one out right now, and I picked up a new one. So I'm going to get that in there and just give it a little bit more time. Another 24 hours have passed, and the new gallon of EVAPO-RUST I put in there only lasted about 8 hours before it turned a very dark black. So I got that out. I put yet another new gallon in and let it sit for 8 hours on the bottom, 8 hours on the top, and it's still looking like new. It has not darkened at all, so that tells me we're done. All the rust is out of the tank. Anyway, I'm going to try something I haven't tried before, and that's using this Red-Kote fuel tank liner. And before I can use that, I do need to do a few things, which I think I'm going to do off camera, which basically includes draining the EVAPO-RUST out. We'll put some water back in, shake it around with the nuts and bolts, get that drained out, the nuts and bolts out, and then fill it with water and degreaser for about 15 minutes. We'll get that out, rinse it out, and then finally, we'll treat it with some acetone. Shake that around and get it out. And once the tank is fully dry, in about 24 hours, we'll be ready to apply some Red-Kote. So, yeah, let me take care of that, and I'll turn the camera back on when I'm ready to proceed with that tank liner. And there's a look at the bottom of the tank now that the EVAPO-RUST is out, and I've given it a rinse with water. I would say that's quite a difference from where we started. Let's take a look at the top. Wow, look at that. The top is almost spotless. And given where we started, I honestly didn't think it would clean up like this. I mean, almost every bit of rust is gone on the top. And of course, we already saw the bottom. That's a huge, huge improvement. So I am pretty happy with that. We're getting pretty close. I got the nuts and bolts out. I just finished soaking it in some degreaser, and now I'm just rinsing it out. So I thought I would just use this opportunity to test the cap. The vent, it was clogged. It freed up, I thought, with the EVAPO-RUST, but I wanted to make sure. So I filled the tank all the way with water, put the cap on tight, and I'm just letting it drain normally, and it has no issue. So the tank, it is not pulling a vacuum, and the cap is working as it should. The tank's been fully degreased and rinsed out, and I mopped up as much as the water as I could get. The acetone is going to help dry the tank. It will absorb some of the water. So I'll just shake this around a bit, drain it right out. Then I'll give it some time to fully dry. did a quick experiment with the Red-Kote, and I just dipped this plastic spoon in, purposely letting this area puddle, and right here, just making a nice thin layer. Now, the instructions, they warn quite a bit about puddling. If the puddle is too deep, it's never going to cure. And in this case, it did cure. It took a while, though, about 24 hours, and this thin coat here cured, or at least was dry to the touch within 30 minutes. So more in this case isn't necessarily better, but you do want to put enough in the tank that you can get coverage all around. So I'm going to put in, I'd say about 2/3 of a can. You know, according to the instructions, this does quite a bit. I think a quart, they say, can do up to 12 gallons. And this is only a 4-gallon tank. You know, that said, I've seen a few videos on YouTube where people are doing a 2-gallon motorcycle tank and they use close to half. So I'm thinking we need more than that. So we'll start with 2/3, and if it's not enough, we can always add. My big concern is what to do about the extra. I can't let it puddle. It will not cure properly. And with motorcycle tanks and automotive tanks, you can just tip it on its side, let it drain out the fill or where the sender unit goes. And in this case, that won't work because this has a lip around here. So nothing's going to come out. It has to come out the pipe on the bottom, which has a very small inner diameter. I would say it's about 1/8 of an inch. And most likely the Red-Kote is not going to come out of there. So with that in mind, I have this brake bleeder, which I can connect and force the Red-Kote out that connection. So that's the plan. I guess we'll see how it goes. I may not actually need this tape here since there's a lip around it. I think it's serving another purpose though, which is to keep air from getting in. So the Red-Kote won't cure without air. I mean, obviously there's a lot in there currently, but without a fresh source of air, it's gonna slow down how quickly this stuff sets. And this tape is not sticking well, so we might already have a problem before we start. You don't want to shake this. You just want to move it around so that it coats everything. And I'm going to try to coat everything. The main focus though is the bottom and the top, because that's where all the damage is currently. I only mixed this around for about a minute. I want to see how quickly this stuff covers. And I'm going to have to do this, even if I have complete coverage, I'm going to have to do this for a while until it starts to cure. Yeah, it didn't take long. We got good coverage. Let me just switch cameras to the bottom facing one. Now we're just looking straight down. Yeah, plenty of coverage. That only took a minute, not even. So I think we're looking pretty good. So I'm going to take this back up, just rotate the tank some more, and start getting the extra out of the tanks. I do not want to block up that fuel outlet, and I don't want it to puddle, in which case it'll never cure. There is a fair amount left in there, so I'm just going to start sucking it out now before it sets. So this stuff will form a skin pretty quickly, and then it's going to be a hassle to do this. I probably could have gotten away with half a can easily. Now I'm just pressurizing it to send the extra back. There's still more in there, but this is full, so I'm going to empty it out and keep going. And that's it. We're sucking air now. Now the fuel inlet, the fuel pipe actually goes up into the tank, maybe 1/8 of an inch. So there is still a puddle there. So I will have to rotate this, I would say, for a good 20 or 30 minutes until stuff stops puddling by that drain. Just going to make sure this drain is clear. Yeah, not completely clear. There is some junk in there. I think we're okay for now. It just ejected a bunch of it. We'll have to double check that, I think, a few times. Really impressed at how well this spreads in the tank. Even after emptying out a fair amount, what little is left really has no issues moving around the tank. So every 10 minutes or so, just move it around, and as soon as stuff stops moving around, you're done. I've got to say, I'm pretty impressed with the coat it left on the tank. You know, so far it's looking pretty good. Anyway, it's not cured. We got to wait up to 24 hours, and I would say the longer, the better. And I did manage to pull out, too, another vial of the Red-Kote, and we have well over half a can left. So this can easily do 2 of these tanks, potentially 3, depending on the size. So yeah, I'm impressed. Anyway, it's not cured yet. We got a ways to go. It's only been an hour or so. And there is still a bit of a puddle in there. So I am moving the tank around every 5 or 10 minutes until that puddle completely disappears. Another 24 hours have passed. And the Red-Kote, it is very dry looking. It is not fully cured though. There's still quite a bit of fumes in the tank, and until those fumes dissipate, it's not cured. Anyway, it is dry enough to at least get it back on the machine. So I say we get it back on, just finish the plumbing and get everything to 100%, and then in a few days, we'll get it outside and put it to the test. So if I remember right, this was zip tied right about there. Then there was a fuel filter right about where my thumb is. So I'm going to cut the line right there. And I'm going to save that almost to last to connect up because the fuel valve is next. So I'm going to get 2 pieces of fuel line attached to the valve. We'll get the valve situated and then we'll just make the final connections. These fuel filters, they're not directional. It's just a metal screen inside. The paper ones you do need to install according to the arrow on the filter. Take just a tiny bit off of here. All right, we are pretty much ready to go here. So this generator, it is rated at 3,600 watts, 120 volts only. So I can't use the load bank. Instead, we'll be using these space heaters to bring on a 3,000 watt load. Now, I have tested one of these recently, and it was surprisingly clean. You know, under a 3,000 watt load, the THD topped out at 3.2%, which is very good for a non-inverter generator. So I'm expecting to see the same here. Anyway, the plan is to get the engine started, we'll let it warm up, we'll double check the outputs, and then we'll bring on the load, see how it does. Well, the good news is the engine started without issue, but we have no power on the kilowatt, yet we do on that light. So that tells me one of the legs is either not outputting power, or we have an issue with a circuit breaker, or potentially a GFCI. So let's just double check that. Well, unfortunately, the GFCI will not reset. So that usually happens when the internals go bad. You know, the normal fault condition is open and you can't reset it. So I'm thinking that's what's going on. You know, another possibility is that there is actually no power coming here because there's a loose wire or some other problem. You know, that said, I don't think we have a generator problem because, you know, I misspoke earlier. There is no leg 1 and leg 2 on here. There's only leg 1, which is 120 volts. And the fact that this outlet works and that one doesn't tells me that the generator actually should be fine. You know, I guess the confusing thing is that according to the label down here, both of these plugs should be a GFCI. and the one on the right is not. So I'm thinking, you know, someone must have replaced that, because usually they're tied together if you only have one, you know, so if that trips, they both go out. The fact that one works and one doesn't, yeah, it tells me they're independent or just wired completely wrong. So I'm actually going to pop the panel off real quick. You know, I do see that there are some screws missing, so someone's been in here. So I just want to make sure there's not a loose wire, you know, causing this issue right here. Well, the good news is there's no loose wires floating around in here, but this GFCI is not connected to anything. So yeah, it's not going to work like that. You know, I've got to imagine someone bypassed it for a reason. So I think we are safe to at least test through here. It is going through the circuit breaker. So let me close this back up. We'll do the load test real quick, and then we'll get this back inside and circle back on that. Well, I'd like to say everything went well, and it kind of did as far as the load testing goes. I mean, the engine started consistently first pull, had no issues handling the 3000 watts. The engine speed held at 58 hertz. The voltage also wasn't bad. You know, it did come down a bit to 116 volts, but that is still passable. And the THD, very similar to the other machine. This one might have been a touch higher at around 3.5% THD, but still much better than most. So from those points, we're doing very well. You know, of course, we know about this issue, so we have to fix that. And the other one I'm noticing is that the fuel valve, it's leaking from the back of the valve. So no surprise, we have another bad valve. We need to get that replaced. Not a big deal. And then the last issue, I'm not really sure if it's an issue yet. But this time when the engine was running, I did hear a very high pitch sound. And it didn't quite sound like a bearing to me. So I'm not sure if we have a bearing issue. You know, potentially that's something else. Not sure. You know, so that's something we're going to have to keep an eye on. But for now, we know for sure we got to get those two things fixed. So let's get this back inside and take care of those issues. thought I'd check the storage locker real quick. I'm pretty sure I have some good GFCI breakers on one of these control panels. You know, they do sell the correct part. According to the parts diagram, it's available for $75. So yeah, I'm not going to pay that kind of money for a GFCI breaker. You know, I could likely go to Home Depot and find something that would work. But, you know, in this case, we don't need to. You know, I've got one right there. And likely, I have more than one. And actually, I only need one for that machine. But I'm going to bring both of these back, just in case one of them's bad. I wasn't able to locate a wiring diagram for this machine, but I did find a parts diagram on this control panel, and it clearly showed that the GFCI was in this position, closest to the circuit breaker, which makes sense. You know, you want both of these protected by that breaker, and the jumper running from the circuit breaker over to here isn't long enough to go over to the GFCI. So, you know, we're going to pull both of these out. You know, we'll test this one real quick. Likely it's bad. So when we put it back together, we'll put the GFCI right there connected to the circuit breaker, and then jumper over to this one, which will be in that position. And also while we're at it, I'm going to pull this 30 amp plug out as well. You know, it looks like there's some sort of issue going on here. You know, it's not sitting flush with the face of the panel. So likely there is some damage there as well. Yeah, definitely something wrong. I haven't removed the bottom screw, and this just came right out. So there is a rivet or something that holds this metal piece on that looks like it's failed because it's still installed. So yeah, let's get this screw out and just see if we can repair it. Yeah, it's supposed to go like that. And yeah, I'm thinking it's a rivet, right? That's the other side of the rivet right there. And unfortunately, although I do have rivets, I don't have any that are like that, but I do have another one of these plugs. So yeah, I guess we'll just replace it. And this is the other one I have. Let's just test fit it real quick. Make sure it lines up, and it seems like we do. So let's get these wires attached. And unfortunately, I don't think this replacement's going to work out. Although it's in good condition, these screws, they don't actually come out. You know, it seems to be expecting solid core wire. And of course, we have ring terminals here. So, you know, I'm thinking we could probably repair this one. You know, although the rivet looks like it is broken, I did find a really thin screw that can go in there. It actually is a really tight fit. So technically, you know, I could just screw that plate in, and likely that would be enough to hold it. But I did find a nylock nut as well for the back. So we can, I guess, punch what's left of the rivet out and cut this screw to size and make the repair. Well, that was easy. Not much left of that one. So we're going to need to cut that screw a little bit longer. You know, we need to leave enough to hold that nylock nut. So I'm thinking right about there. Even without the nut, it's in there nice and tight. So it's almost not necessary, but we'll just put it on for good measure. Maybe. I think that'll do. Actually going to leave these loose until we get all the wires situated. I suppose we should check this and make sure it is actually bad. It was disconnected, and I'm assuming it's for a reason. But let's just make sure. So the only way I know of to test it is to actually energize it and try to reset it. So that's what I'm prepping to do. And one thing I noticed while sacrificing a cord, these cords, they are fairly universal really across the world. And the only difference is the plug on the other end, and of course the voltage that's going through it. So this is an American style plug, and if you look at the wires, those are not the right colors for this country. These look like European colors, which is fine. I guess it doesn't really matter. But when you look at the wire gauge, that's where the problem is. This is 20 gauge wire, and that would be adequate, I'm sure, at 240 volts, but at 120, that cannot power much. And this cord, it's very universal. It plugs into a lot of things, especially computers. And these cords are used on printers, like laser printers. If this cord was actually used to power a high demand device like that, I think it might end poorly. So just keep that in mind. Some of these cords, although you would think that the wire gauge would be universal based on the type of plug it has, that is not the case. So be sure to double check the cord and make sure it's up to the task that you're going to put it to. So right now I have this other end of the cord plugged into a power strip, and it's turned off so it's safe to touch. Now, besides getting the wire colors and the gauge wrong, this cord has another problem. Brown is supposed to be the live wire and blue the neutral. And in this case, they actually wired brown to neutral according to the plug on the other end. So that's the way I wired it, but yeah, not right. So it's probably a good thing I cut it up. There's lots of issues with this cord. Anyway, let's turn the power strip on, see what happens. And that was uneventful. So right now this is live. The light's not on, but let's try to reset it. And surprisingly it reset. We have a green light. Let's try the test button. And it seems to work fine. So why would somebody bypass this? Does it fail under load? Not sure. But it would seem to me like it's good. So I'm tempted to put it right back in the machine, but we've already taken it out. You know, we have some others that I believe are also good. So let's just put one of those in to be safe. Just going to take this whole control panel apart. You know, I don't see myself using this one again, just because of how faded it is, and the display is also broken. And since we're stealing one of the outlets, it doesn't leave a whole lot, so we'll just stick these circuit breakers and the other plugs in a bin so they're ready to go for next time. That should do. I'm going to remove this sticker because this is going to be the load side. This is going to feed the other plug that's not GFCI protected, but now that is coming from here, it will be protected. And I'm going to use the jumpers from that control panel I just took apart to make that connection. So there's one, and then the neutral side. Same thing, we'll put the feed right here on the input side. And again, we'll use a jumper from the other machine. And as far as this issue goes right here, I do have some new 90-degree valves. You know, unfortunately, they don't quite fit. And even if they did, it's not a very good design because the fuel from the tank comes in through the back and then exits through the top. And there's a little cutout right here where the fuel line actually comes up and then over to the carburetor. So this level is actually above the bottom of the tank. And like that, I can definitely see a scenario where the tank won't fully drain. So this, I think we're going to skip, and instead we're just going to leave the valve right here in line. You know, we can zip tie it right there. And as far as this line goes, I do need to cut it back, just move the filter down a little bit, and then we can make the turn and connect it right in. Yeah, it's kind of a tight corner, so I'm thinking, you know, I may actually use the 90 just outside of here. And is that going to do anything for us? Yeah, I think it makes a better corner, right? Because we have to make a 90. And then the valve's right out front here. I've got the fuel line clamped off, so let's see if I can get this off without knocking those vice grips off. Okay. And ideally, this line would actually be a little bit longer. We are about an inch short, but I think it'll be okay. You know, if we didn't have fuel in the tank, then I'd probably swap that line out. But I think this will be just fine. Yeah, I'm thinking something like that. All right, let's give this a quick try. I've plugged in a tester to each of these outlets. Now, if everything's wired correctly, we should get 2 yellow lights on each of these. If we get anything different, then we do have a wiring issue. Now, assuming we get 2 yellow lights on each, you know, that means things are correct. You know, we'll hit the red button, and if the GFCI is working, it should trip, at which point we can try to reset it. And hopefully we see these lights turn back on. Well, guys, that's pretty much a wrap. You know, this machine didn't really need a whole lot, but as we found out, there were a bunch of little things. You know, the big story here was the tank. Thankfully, that cleaned up with some nuts and bolts and Evaporust, and the Red-Kote should protect it for a long time. So I'm glad I tried it. You know, that said, I'm not going to be in a big rush to do it again. You know, these tanks really don't lend themselves well to it. You know, once you coat the tank, you really have to tilt it in such a way that it can continuously drain as it drips. And it takes hours, actually, for things to dry enough to stop dripping. And with the lip on the top, you couldn't let it drain from there. And the pipe on the bottom is just too small. You know, it won't drain on its own. So thankfully, I did have that brake bleeder, and that kind of saved the day. That said, though, it still took hours of using that brake bleeder to kind of drain the puddle every time one formed. And at one point, I actually got some of the coating in the Mighty Vac pump. And unfortunately, that pump's not working so well anymore. So that either has to be fixed or replaced. Anyway, we are 2 for 2. We just have one more to go. And to that end, I'm actually going to hold off a few weeks before tackling that one. It's still early in the season. The grass hasn't started to grow. So once things green up a bit, we will tackle the mower and hopefully be 3 for 3. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.